Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the Managing Director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're discussing top 5 books that you ought to read before becoming an Asia expat. And what are we talking about here? Well, a lot of people, especially lately, seem to be looking more and more at Asia. I think there's a lot of reasons for this. I think people are seeing that Asia definitely is on the rise economically. There's a lot going on out here. Thailand specifically, there's a lot of developments that I think a lot of people want to get in on, getting into Thailand, getting into the market, sort of learning the market. All of this stuff kind of compounds to kind of create a cohort of sort of putative, Asia hands, Asia expats. And I've had a lot of people ask me over the years, but here recently, it seems like in the past couple of weeks specifically, books that they think people should read before coming here. And I got to thinking about it, and so I did this video. I'm going to have one that's kind of an honorable mention. So actually, there's kind of 6 to mention here. The first one, I'll go ahead with the honorable mention first. That would be a book I read years ago called Mr. China. It was about a person that was an expat, went into China to do business in kind of the early era, I would say in the early 2000s. A lot of interesting insight in that. In fact, quite a bit. Now, the reason I state it as an honorable mention is I don't know that China is really quite the hotspot from a Western perspective for, again, folks that are looking to expatriate, make their money in Asia, make their living in Asia. I don't know that China is still in the same place that it was with regard to those people's perspectives as it was, say, 20 years ago. So that's kind of why we put that in honorable mention. Now, 3 of the books on this list are actually from the same author, which I'll get to in a minute. One book I read was a book called Ugly Americans, and I read that years ago. I read that long before I ever even dreamed of coming out to Asia. And that was about a person that got into the, as I recall, sort of the stockbrokering game in Japan. Again, I think it was in the 90s. Might have even been in the 80s. But I remember reading that, and that was quite insightful as to, kind of the cultural interchange as well as the way different cultures do business, especially out here in Asia. That was an interesting one. Another one is, well, again, this is one of the books from one of the author that wrote 3 of these books. One of them is called King Rat by an author named James Clavell, who, in my opinion, arguably is the great fiction author with respect to the West's interaction with Asia, the sort of interaction between the Orient and the Occident. Clavell is, in my opinion, the best, the master, if you will. He just does a uniquely superb job. The 3 books that are mentioned here are my 3 favorite of his, but even in his Asia series, ones that I was not quite as over the top about, they're still quite good. So if you read Clavell's books, I think there's a lot of insight for the person who wants to be an expat. Now, King Rat would seemingly not, you wouldn't exactly think that would be the greatest book, because it's about people who were in prison, in Changi Prison in Singapore during the Second World War, mostly British, and the main character is Corporal King, who's an American. King Rat, it provides a great deal of insight, though, into a lot, again, just the sort of subtle nuances that sort of make up being an expat out here, make up being somebody who's kind of transplanted and living in Asia. Another one, this is Bangkok specific, and I was kind of trying to think of the best books that I read. There's a kind of a subset of fiction and even nonfiction, which I would sort of call the pulp Thailand books. It's like the pulp fiction, if you will, kind of, but it's specifically about Thailand. And there's a lot of great books out there about Thailand. I know some great authors who've written books about Thailand. The reason I pointed out this specific book is I literally read it the week I came here. It's had pretty substantial impact on my thinking, or it did at the time. I kind of look back on it more with nostalgia than look back on it as a sincere reference guide. It's a book called Confessions of a Bangkok Private Eye. Again, I read that, I believe, the week that I arrived in Thailand some 15 years ago. And yeah, it provided some insight. It was not the end-all be-all with respect. I really kind of question whether there's ever been sort of the definitive novel or nonfiction book that's been written about, that's out there, if you will, about an expat in Thailand, a foreigner in Thailand. I just don't know if there's one out there. There was a biography I read at the same time called Falcone, which is about a gentleman named Constantine Falcone going back hundreds of years ago. That was also interesting from a non-fictional standpoint, but again, I wouldn't say it was definitive. And then two other books on my list. Again, I guess the list got a little bigger. We've added two on. Falcone was an honorable mention too. But Noble House and Taipan, and I have a hard time judging which one of these is number one with a bullet. I'd say they're both number one with a bullet, maybe. But Taipan actually should be read first because it's about the founding of Hong Kong, the British coming to Hong Kong, and the old China traders, the old Taipans as they were called. And then Noble House picks up the story about what happens to the descendants of the main character some roughly 100 years later, 120 years later actually, I think. So both books when read together are quite interesting, in my opinion, provide a great deal of insight. Mr. Clavel wrote both of those as well, and he spent a great deal of time out in Asia. I believe he actually was in Changi prison during the war, so obviously he had unique perspective on that, which allowed him to write the book King Rat. But I really can't stress enough, and it's all Taipan and Noble House are based in China, specifically Hong Kong. And Noble House is interesting because of the changes that were happening by the time that book was coming out in sort of the orientation, if you will, of mainland China to Hong Kong and the interplay there. And we're kind of seeing the saga continue to unfold in real time, as events unfold here in the moment. So reading both of those books, I think, provides substantial insight. Do I think any of these books are the end-all, be-all sort of primer on how to make it as an expat? No. What I do think that they will provide the reader is a kind of paradigm to have. And really, it's not just a Thailand thing. I specifically said Asia in the title because this is not just about Thai expats. If anything, I don't think, again, I mean this, I don't think there's been the definitive book, much like Taipan and Noble House to me. If somebody said in 1991, what book should I read when going to Hong Kong, I would have just said Taipan and Noble House. Just read those. You would have a substantial understanding of the way things are working in Hong Kong. That's me as an outside observer. I could be totally off. There could be a million Hong Kong residents that burn me in the comments, but that's just my observation. Again, there's no specific book that's going to give you any major insight into exactly how to do things as an expat in any specific country. But I think that any or all of these books provides at least some food for thought for anyone thinking, especially anybody younger. Now, retirees, not so much, because retirees, they're coming here to retire. These books, in my mind, provide insight to anybody who's looking to come to Asia, make their living, and make their way here.